So welcome to the next coaching conversation. We're really excited tonight to welcome Tim Crawford from the New England Revolution. He's their data analytics head there. So the format for tonight is Tim's going to do an overview presentation of his role and background and how they use data analytics. We're then going to jump to questions that had been sent in prior to this evening on the form, and then we'll do some Q&A from the chat box. So if you do have questions as you go along, please type them into the chat box. We're more than happy to answer whatever we can or whatever Tim can. We would ask that you stick to the data analytics and the soccer side of things rather than asking questions regarding promotion relegation or DA, because Tim, obviously, his role is in data analytics, and that's what we're looking to present on tonight. So without further ado, Tim, thank you. Welcome.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
looking forward to it.
Cool. All right. Everybody can hear me and everything, right? We're good?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. All right. So yeah, this is, I'll start with my background. I grew up in Billerica. So I've been a Revs fan almost since they existed. Maybe it took me a couple of years to get into them. But yeah, I was a season ticket holder my senior year of high school. Through college when I was at UConn and everything. So I was a big Revs fan. And yeah, I ended up going to UConn for math and mainly to just watch sports. But I got a bachelor's of math and a minor in statistics. I actually hated statistics there. Thought it was really boring. I ended up doing Sudokus in all those classes all the time. But I got the minor anyways. My mom thought it would be a good thing to do, so we did it. And then ended up moving to California for a few years. Just my sister was moving out there to help restart a church, and I said if I could get a job, I don't really need to be a math, so I'll go out too. And we both ended up becoming math teachers at Burbank High in California. Yeah, it was one of those things when you're doing math in college and everyone asks you what are you going to do with that, and I just keep telling them, oh, there's plenty of things. Everybody needs math. You need to do math in all these different areas. And they're like, are you going to teach? No, I'm not going to teach. There's plenty of opportunities in math, whatever. And then you end up teaching. But I taught for 2 years. The first year I ended up teaching AP statistics. And that's when I actually realized that I do actually really like statistics and seeing it a bit more applied and the things I was doing with those students. It turned the light bulb on, I guess, for me and let me know, oh yeah, this is kind of fun. And so I taught for 2 years. I could not discipline a class. So that was kind of the downfall of that. I can teach you if you want to learn for sure, but I cannot control a classroom of rowdy teenagers, I guess. So they made the wise decision to not rehire me, and then I was left thinking about what I wanted to do from there. So it took about a year of tutoring and everything, trying to figure it out, and then ended up going back to school at UCLA for statistics, and really figured I'd get into something like market research because I think understanding people is really interesting to me. But obviously, I'm a huge sports fan, and if I could get a job in sports and analytics, fantastic. I just figured there's pretty much no chance of that because there's probably a lot of demand without any real supply for those jobs. And UCLA is on the quarter system, and in the first quarter there, they ended up posting the Revs ended up posting a job listing for an analyst. And even before I clicked, I was like, oh, it's going to have to do with money, and I do not do math and money. But it was actually about the soccer side of things. And I was like, well, if I can already do this, I don't need to be here. And so I applied, and then somewhere into the second quarter, they decided to hire me. And so I left UCLA. So that was a fast turnaround. And I've been with the team since 2012. So this would have been my 9th season if we were having a season right now. Definitely some highs and lows, but yeah. And yeah, so I got brought in pretty much right when Brian Below became president and Jay Heaps became the head coach. So it was kind of like a restart, and I was a part of that. Brian went to MIT, and he's done some analytics in sports before, and so really wanted to make sure that was a part of our club moving forward. And it was cool because I got to build the relationship with Jay from the beginning, and just kind of grow things from there. And it was a position that hadn't existed in our club and really hadn't existed in the league to that point. So it was very open and just trying to figure out what do we even want to look at, what stats can we make, what's already out there, and just kind of trying to start from the ground up and see how we can impact our team and make it better is, as I said, wide open. So In 2012, we were working with Match Analysis as our main data provider. They're a company, they were around the whole time. I've been there until, I guess, last year. I think they finally stopped existing. But they're largely a really good tool for coaches to analyze video. And they have like they had an online platform and everything for coaches to look at some stats. And they came up with some metrics of their own as well. But trying to get data from them was very difficult. It wasn't like there was a place I could just go download the data from any game, or I could just download, export a CSV or something of all the data I want to look at. So if we had an idea, the process was, okay, we have this idea. Now I have to go ask them, send them an email, be like, hey, can you make this a spreadsheet for me? And they often would give us pushback. Sometimes it felt like the time was getting longer and longer between responses. But so a lot of times they'd send us back the data eventually, and then I'd look through it. But this, I'll show you what the data generally would end up looking like from them. So this is kind of like the year-end stat dump from them. So yeah, it's a lot of just like all the stats across the top. So you see different kinds of shots, and different kinds of touches and all that stuff. And this will go very far over to the right, but broken down by player, broken down by position they played, broken down by team. And to be fair, this looks a lot like a sheet I use, but I've kind of assembled it myself and with statistics that I've come up with myself, not the ones that they were already tracking necessarily. So it just didn't have that flexibility of being like, oh, we have an idea. How can we break down the data to do this? How can we break down the raw events of just this happened and this happened and collect it in a way that suits us? It was very much, what do they already have? How can we take it and use it? So we kind of realized that it wasn't heading in the direction we wanted. And so in 2013, we started working with Opta. Opta is the official data provider for the league. Yeah, I think it has been for some time. I'm not sure if it was around that year or what, but they record data from all over the world. So a lot of the leagues use Opta, which is great for me because it allows the things I do in our league to be transferable to the other leagues if we get that data. But they basically have a setup where there's 3 people watching any given match. There's 1 person assigned to each team, and then 1 person is quality control. And so they're just clicking the screen rapidly, basically. And every time something happens, they enter it. They hit the right keys to say, oh, this was a pass by this player at this time from this spot to this spot. And this pass was chipped, or it was a through ball. It was complete. It wasn't complete. All these different qualifiers, right? So we would get 1 file for every game. Actually, we can get a couple of files for each game, but essentially 1 file that I'd use called F24. It's pretty well known in the soccer data community, but we consider it to be the raw data, right? So it's just a list of events, and I'll show you that one too. So I've blue boxed one event here, right? So it's an XML file, and it's just a ton of different events. It's how the game is broken down. So this basically says this is type ID 1, means this is a pass in the first half, 1 minute and 23 seconds in by this player on this team, and it was completed at this spot on the field. And then it's got some other qualifiers here. 140 and 141 I know are where the pass went to, X2 and Y2. And there's some other stuff, different values here. I think it's like angle and direction, distance and direction. And there's also, I don't know what a 5 is. A free kick, actually, I think. But yeah, so I get used to seeing these all the time. But basically, this is what the data would look like. And it just, as I said, listed out event by event by event and just said, this is what happened in the game. Now you do with it what you want. But the fact is, I don't have to record the data myself. I just get the data summarizing how the game went, right? Like all these events, and I say, okay, how do we want to break it down? And so basically, I've been working with this data the entire time I've been with the Revs. This has been nonstop. We can keep coming up with new things to do with this. It's pretty much, it's been an unending bag of stuff to come up with. So it's awesome. The downside for this is that this is all things that happen with the ball. It doesn't at all show me what's happening off the ball. It doesn't tell me who's making runs. It doesn't tell me what defender was standing in this guy's way when he made this pass or something, right? So we have a very limited perspective from this, but for those many years, it provides a ton of information. I'm still getting things from it. While I'm at home, I'm working on a project we'll hopefully be using for scouting players and stuff, assembling a bunch of different models just based on this event data, because as I said, this is transferable to any other league where this kind of data is being kept, right? But there's a lot that we don't know yet because we don't get to see all the players on the field all the time. And so starting this season, and for us, it's been a couple of years actually where we've worked with this company, but just for our own home games. But we MLS signed a deal with Second Spectrum, and they are tracking data. So basically, they record 25 times per second the location of all the players on the field for the length of the game. So that's 25 times 60 times 90 plus stoppage time. That's how many data points we have. And so that's the kind of the raw data they give us now, where it's any spot in the match, any frame on the video, you can say, okay, we know the location of all the players in the data. And so this is getting me to the point of just right now, I'm just trying to figure out how to work with this. I mean, this is crazy, right? This is a big step up. So this blue box now is 1/25th of a second. That's what that looks like. So this is just repeated over and over and over again. And so it's a big mess. And so I'm trying to figure out how to even, start to play with it. And so right now I'm just trying to figure out, okay, if I know there was a pass at this time, trying to figure out what frame that was in the video or in the Second Spectrum data, so that then I can see, okay, who was close to the guy passing the ball, how far away was he, what angle was he, things like that. So it's kind of multi-step, and it's just a loose idea for a first thing to start looking at, just so I can figure out how I can handle it. But this is a shift we've gone through, right? And they also have a platform for us to use that already summarizes some of this, so I'm not just creating everything myself, but that is kind of my job, is to innovate new ideas, not just the ideas they're going to give to us. So they have some ideas of pressure, and they have some ideas of expected goals and things like that, but we're going to make our own models from this data and start pairing up video and everything. But this is the big change this year it's hitting. So I right now have 2 games for all the teams basically of this data, and that's it. So I'm just kind of starting to dig into it and figure out how we can use it and how we can access it the right way, so that as we get more games, we can start really being smart with it and coming up with some cool ideas to do. And what I will say too is this has caused me to shift how I do work. UCLA taught me a lot about R. R is a statistical programming language. It's free, which is great, and it's really awesome, and I think pretty simple to use. I was there, like I said, I was at UCLA for like 1 quarter, and what I picked up there has carried me through my time with the Revs. But now this data is almost too big for R, and so I'm having to shift gears and learn some Python instead. So it's a big year of change for me for sure. I'm still keeping doing the same things with Opta, but now we're trying to add in all this extra data. So there's a lot going on in my world, I guess. So. And so, yeah, moving into how my role actually looks, I'd say there's kind of 5 areas that I'm thinking of anyways right now. The first is reflection, trying to evaluate how we as a team are doing, whether that's in a single match or over some span of the season. The second is opposition analysis. I'd say that's largely where I've tried to make my niche at this point over these years, has been to actually try and understand the tactics of the teams we're going to be playing against, give some insight into that. Scouting, so trying to find players both in our league and outside, and I'd say this is the area that's increasing the most, hopefully moving forward. And then sports science, so it's changed a lot through the years. We've had different guys in charge of as our fitness coach, but the guy who's here now, this is his 2nd year, and he's probably going to be here for a while, I think, and just kind of overhauling a lot of the department. And with this Second Spectrum data, we're also getting fitness data from that, because knowing all the players' positions and everything, we can know how fast they're running and all that stuff. So helping those guys out a lot with how they want to visualize their data and understand it. And then innovation. So that's, like I was saying, on the Second Spectrum stuff, just kind of coming up with ideas of different things to look at. And a lot of times it will fall into one of these 4 areas eventually once we get there, but just trying to be creative and come up with new things to do. So going area by area here, I'll show you a little bit of what we've done and talk about them. But so first, reflection, trying to understand our team's performances, and I'll show you some slides here from like a match report. So this is something I have automated now in PowerPoint. So after the game, I just kind of hit run on a few things in R, and in PowerPoint, it makes this match report for me automatically, and I can hand it over to the coaches. And so this is one of the things we look at is team stats. Right, it's one of the first pages, just a good summary of the game. And so a couple things to highlight here. We have expected goals. This is from our first week match against Montreal. We lost, but expected goals will say that we maybe should have, I don't know if one is correct. We won by a little bit in expected goals, but not necessarily convincing. But a loss seems very harsh in this case, especially giving up 2 goals on 1.26 expected. But if you watch this game, Aruti's second goal is a ridiculous chip from outside the box. So that probably explains a lot of that. But yeah, so expected goals is a really useful stat for us. I think it's becoming more and more well known around the world, and just the casual soccer fans starting to get an idea of what this is. And this is basically just a way to summarize all those times when people are saying, "Oh man, we played so well. How did we lose that game?" or something like that, right? Well, this summarizes how you probably felt about the game without it reflecting the goal total necessarily. So it's based on the quality of the chances you get. How many goals would you expect a team to have scored based on those chances? And so in this game, if you have a 30% chance of scoring, that's 0.3 expected goals, right? So we had 1.41 expected goals, Montreal 1.26. So again, we probably feel like a tie makes the most sense here, but if anything, we'd probably be the winners, and instead we lost. So if a coach is frustrated after this game, be like, yeah, I back you up, but that probably makes sense. Now, if they think we were convincing in this game, I'd probably disagree. And so it's just kind of a number to hopefully it matches up with what they're seeing, but it's a quick summary. It's not going to be the be all end all. And obviously there's things our model hasn't captured yet because, as I said, like this is only factoring in things on the ball. It doesn't factor in where defenders were standing and how far off the line the goalkeeper was or whatever. But it has some idea of distance and angle and how the ball got to where it got to, things like that. So that's a big one for us. We do look at possession. I think possessions, I think people know now that it doesn't mean much, but it's something contextual that you can definitely read into. So it makes sense in this game. In the first half, we were getting very outpossessed, and in the second half, they eventually went ahead. And what do you know? Our possession evened out a little bit because we needed to score, so we started keeping the ball more. They backed off. I mean, it usually happens that kind of way. But yeah, it's a number we watch. We also like to look at recoveries, or I do. I put it in there and hope they watch. But recoveries, just looking at, and mostly the attacking half recoveries, how many times are we picking up the ball in the attacking half? And initially when I put that in there, it was something I thought was a very good indicator of how we performed, and I think it still can be. But I think it started to differ a little bit, where I think a lot of teams in MLS have gone after these kind of things, this high press, and the risk or the reward of it has dwindled a little bit. But it is a number I like to keep an eye on. The other thing down the bottom here, I think, is assist zone passes. So there's something I did last year looking just quickly at where assists typically come from, and it turned out as a very specific area. And so I started putting this in here of like how many passes did we get from those areas versus them. And that would show another way of just showing how dangerous we were compared to them. And Montreal actually had more here. So just kind of a quick summary of the game, looking at that stuff. So next up, just an example of like passing networks and showing how our shape ended up looking in the game. I also like to just look at, were we left leaning, or were we right leaning? Where did we keep the ball the most? A lot of times we're a team that has the ball in these two areas, the midfield and the attack. And we love to see, this is one where possession can be understood in a very different way, right? So if we gave up 70% possession, that might be very scary for us. But if their touches are all in their own defensive half, we don't care. That's totally fine. If they want to pass it around their defenders all the time, fantastic. And we definitely have had some games like that. And I think that's usually my happiest ones after the game. We beat a team, we got 30% possession, and you see that basically the center backs passed it to the defensive midfielder all game, and they just passed it in a circle. So this gives a little bit more context to that, to show who's connecting with who, where all their touches were, things like that. But yeah, this again, it's just an automated graphic. I made it probably a few years ago that just kind of gets made automatically after the game. And then just another small example here, talking about expected goals. So in that game, this is where our shots came from. If you're watching that game, maybe you remember Tejan Buchanan hitting the post with a header point blank. So as you can see, headed shots is the box, and that would be that, and that would be our best chance of the game. So it's almost a 50-50 chance he was going to score from there. If you're watching, it probably felt like it was a little bit higher than that. But yeah, We had it as about a 0.5. So that was, like a third of our expected goals for that game came from that one chance, and he didn't score it. Whereas our one goal is this thick circle here, and it was like a 7% chance of being scored as a volley from Teo off a corner, I believe. Just a good summary of reminding the coaches basically where our chances came from, and what the real percentages were of those. So they're not thinking, oh, that was a great chance when he shot it from here and hit the post. It's like, but that was probably the best he was going to do from there. You really only have 4% chance of scoring, something like that. But we do look at this all the time, just looking at where our shots came from. We also have a separate one where it's looking at where the key passes came from. So, so we look at these match reports after every game. We will do throughout the year, we'll do different things to reflect on how we're performing. I know a few years ago, the league or a lot of pundits were harping on how bad we were at defending crosses. And my stats were also showing we were giving up a ton of goals on crosses. And so I started looking deeper into that and just trying to understand where were those goals coming from, what side. Was it a product of us giving up too many crosses, giving up too many shots from those crosses, or the shots going in? And just kind of broke it down that way. But we do have periods of reflection on ourselves throughout the year. We do big year-end stuff too, just to say, try and rein in what our perception was on the season. A lot of last year's offseason was showing how things changed when we changed coaches, to show where our success kind of came from, and to show also that there were some things that we did really well, but there were some things that we still weren't doing great and needed to be fixed. So reflecting on our own performance is a big part of what I do. Studying the opposition, like I said, this is where I think a lot of what I've done in the past has been important or been used, because coaches can watch video in these games. It takes a long time to do it. They'll usually watch 2 or 3 games of an opponent, but that's about all you can get, whereas my stats can look at something over a year and give you a better idea of how things are going, and make sure you weren't just watching the 3 weirdest games the team had all year, or it might, while you get a recent sample, it might be good also to just to look how they've evolved over the season. So this is just a quick summary of corner kicks. I have a lot of things here for Atlanta just because this was my sample over the off season as I fixed some things. Was just looking at Atlanta because we played them the last couple of games of the year. So this is their corner kicks for the season at the end of last year, showing what they were doing from the left and right, how many times they were going short versus direct, in swingers and out swingers. The big thing I like to do here is just look at who takes them and who the targets were. And the targets are tough because, as I said, we only have things when the ball is involved. So if they aim for somebody and they overshot them completely, we won't pick that up. But more often than not, I feel like I'm at least zeroing in on guys who are the most commonly used. So I can give a quick heads up to the coaches of what these are the guys we need to make sure we're covering the most. So Gonzalez Pires definitely stands out. He's probably the guy our defenders would mark, our top defender would end up marking. Obviously Joseph's a big one, and Miles Robinson, the top 3 on both sides are the same. So those are the guys that we probably want to make sure we're defending with their best defenders. Now they can probably pick this up from the video, from the general knowledge of the league, but sometimes you have someone sneak in here who maybe you weren't thinking about. So it's good to have that quick little piece of insight for them. And the heat maps here, just, the top ones are where are these corner kicks landing according to Opta, and where are they landing when they're actually completed. So if they're all landing here, but in actuality, the ones that are going to their own team are a little bit further along. So it looks like the incomplete ones are when they're getting cut off at this, at the near post a little bit at the edge of that 6. But when they can push it past there, they're getting them more completed. So just little insights that might pop up, depends on the team. Sometimes this could be completely useless, but it's just something we look at every week. This is a big one too, just team summary, looking at where their goals and shots are coming from. Again, it has expected goals per match for the teams. Can I give a quick summary of how they're doing? And also how long their possessions are. And these numbers only mean something when you've seen them a lot. So I know 3.52 is pretty high for passes per possession, even though it sounds really small. You're only getting 3.5 passes every time you get the ball. But you have a lot of zeros and a lot of ones. So they keep the ball a decent amount. We look at how often their goals come from counters and quick attacks, which are we've kind of built in our own definitions of these things, and we've broken the game into possessions. That was a big thing with Opta data over the years, just breaking the game into possessions rather than looking at event by event. So trying to see how teams play their styles, it involves what they do with the ball in sequence, not singular events. And so 2 of the things we look at are counters and quick attacks. And basically this means, are they scoring fast? Because those are the two things that those are. And MLS, I feel like, has pushed a lot in that direction of scoring fast. And this is where we see that a lot, how many shots they're getting, all that kind of stuff. And we look at what they're getting from crosses. We look at whether they're coming from the left, middle, or right, all that stuff. Set pieces here. Down here, we also like to look at when are we giving up goals, when are we scoring goals. And I can tell you that this 19 goals against in the last 15 minutes of games, most of that was before Bruce Arena came, actually. So this was at the beginning of the season. This number was enormous. I think it was something like 14 before he even got here. So this actually did not go up much for the rest of the year. So this was a big change. But at that point, it was saying, what is wrong with us? We are just falling to pieces at the end of the games. And it stuck out pretty strongly. But now it's come back. Still looks bad, but it's come back down to earth a little bit. But yeah, we like to see when as a team maybe getting exposed. And it's up to the coaches kind of what they want to do with that. I'm also keeping an eye on the cautions and ejections, both for our team and for the opponent, because we're doing this ahead of time. And so if I saw Gonzalez Pires was suspended, I'd just make sure the coaches know that in advance, that they can be planning for him not being there. A lot of times we'll do this before the team's last game, before they play us too. So I'd be like, oh, these guys are the ones you're rooting for to get yellow cards. Just so we could be anticipating who might be suspended. And for us also just keeping an eye on who's on warning and how many games left they have to go. That's what the parentheses are for good behavior, right? We have an MLS rule that if you go 5 games in a row without a yellow, you drop your total down 1. And so that's what this number in parentheses is. So like Agudelo will need 1 more game to get good behavior, something like that. But it's just a quick summary to hand over to the coaches. I have a lot of other stuff that we hand over each week, stuff about the team's roster, stuff about what their formations looked like the last however many games, so we can kind of build up our best guess. And then anything else, if they have a request for the week, I'll come up with that too. There's some stuff I don't hand over that I just look at myself, and if something stands out, I'll mention it to them. A lot of possession type stuff. What do they do a lot? What actually works for them? Things like that. Cool. For scouting, I'd say this is an area that we're really trying to develop right now. Like I said, it hasn't been a big focus for my role to this point. What I've done is help in the league when I can. So sometimes that's them saying, oh, we're interested in this guy. What do your numbers say? And it'll be put into the mix of how they're evaluating this guy. When reentry draft comes around or anything like that, where I can take a look at a short list of guys and say, oh, this guy stands out, you should take more of a look at him, and they'll go watch video on him. That will happen too. So a few years ago, we took a guy in the reentry draft. We were planning on taking a guy in that position. I didn't know that necessarily. I just looked at my list and said, this guy actually looks like one of the best attacking outside backs in the league this year, not just that's available, but in the league. And so I passed it along and ended up watching more video on him and decided to switch the guy they were going to take to that guy. But same position and everything. So I can have that kind of impact occasionally. So this year, whether or not it's someone on a trade where they'll come to me and say, we're thinking about trading for this guy. What do you say? And I'll give them a layout of, well, he's good at this. He's not great at this. Take with that what you want. I don't know what your goal is for getting him. I don't want that bias, but just saying, this is what kind of a player I see him as, and what do you think? And so we have data for MLS. We haven't invested a ton in data outside the league. That's something we're going to be moving into in the next little bit, hopefully, if we come back. And then trying to turn around and take the metrics we've used to evaluate players in the league and use them elsewhere to find players. Now, the tricky part will be that it's probably just going to be Opta data, but rather than second spectrum data, that's not everywhere. But we can take the models we've used in Opta and apply them elsewhere. So hopefully this will be a big area for us moving forward and trying to be smarter about what we're doing to find talent. Already, when our scouts are finding players, those guys are asking what I see and the little data we have on them, if there's anything that sticks out, and some comparables so they can understand how that player plays and is he better or worse than that guy stats wise. So we're trying to impact that area a lot more right now. And sports science has been really busy for me in this off season. We started working with Tableau, which is a program for data visualization, and I've had some time playing around with it in the past, and the guys that I work with haven't done too much with it, but they have a vision of the things they want and what they want to see, and so I'm trying to turn that vision into something they can actually look at. And like I said, with Second Spectrum coming on, we're getting all this physical data for all the players every game and trying to have a way to share that with the coaches that they'll understand, and just a way to keep track of how the players are doing. So one of the big things I was doing since I got home for this spell was making a bit better of a post-match report. So this is an example when we played Chicago of just one player's page. I blacked out his name and everything because I'm not sure about HIPAA laws in this. So just to show his information from this game of how he performed in 5-minute increments. This is information that Second Spectrum just hands over to us. Of this is how much distance he did in the 5-minute span. This is how much he was doing high speed running, sprint distance, sprints, all that stuff, right? And so making these graphs and trying to give them a good way as we go throughout the season to see how this player performed, and we can see it relative to the team average, relative to the opponent's average in his position group. We're also planning on getting a line that would be for his personal average, how he's done over the season. And that's going to take a few games to get into and try and figure out what exactly we want to look like. Do we include when he's a sub? Do we not? But we have a page like this for every player. In the first page of the game, just kind of shows, the first page of the report shows how every player did during this game as well. So a quick summary. But we also have training reports that we're handing out every day showing which players did the most sprinting, which players did the most distance, and our head athletic trainer is very aware of the fact that someone who runs a lot will run a lot every day. And so just because he's winning every day doesn't mean he's doing the best, because it's all relative to what he does, right? And so we need to factor in those training averages, and we're working on figuring out the right ways to do that and make these as smart as we can be. So that it's not just that same guy getting a pat on the back every day, but showing when guys exceed what they normally do, and who's putting in a lot of work above what they're used to, and that might be too much, things like that. We need those kind of things to stand out. So we're trying to be smart with those reports. We're also just breaking it down drill by drill. What does this drill get us? Does it get us a lot of sprinting? Does it get us a lot of accelerations and decelerations because they're changing direction all the time? We can get those summaries if we're consistent with how we're labeling things and trying to understand the data that comes from them. So a lot going on with that area. And then, last thing is innovation. So when I started the job, there was nothing. As I said, it was all me coming up with new ideas, sitting down with our president, sitting down with our head coach, trying to come up with new ideas of things to look at. And as we've done that, they've become things that we look at every week because if they work out. If we have a good idea, then rather than have it be something that suddenly hits on a Wednesday when we've been planning for a team all week, it's something that now we look at the beginning of our process. Where whatever process that is, that's how we come up with new things is sitting down, having this back and forth, and then this becomes something that just becomes ingrained in our culture. But it starts with just trying to come up with new ideas. And sometimes, honestly, this is finding new ideas that other people are already trying, and me trying to either do the exact same thing or tweak it a bit and come up with something that makes more sense to us. There is absolute plagiarism going on. But there's a lot of cool ideas out there. And so I'm eager to try whatever seems to be effective and could be helpful for us. That's a good summary of what I do. I think I hit on most things. So
Awesome. Tim, if you want to just jump off the screen share, and then we can converse back and forth. Just while you're doing that, we had a question pop up from Lutz while you were talking about the tracking data. Is the data based on location beacons of the player? Or video frame interpretation? Yeah,
it's just video at this point. The players also wear the pods, and that we have we work with Stat Sports right now, and so we'll get that data as well, and you can try and line it up and everything. And that's probably, to be fair, it's going to be more consistent with the training data they get every day, because that's the same pod they're wearing at training every day. They're wearing it during that game. But Second Spectrum tracking data is from video, and like I said, 25 frames per second. Hopefully will be more accurate than the pods themselves. We'll see. But
Cool. And then a technical question from Claudia is, do you know how many cameras are involved, what angles they measure from, and is the data measured by each team, or the league has the video and then shares it, distributes it to you guys?
Okay. Well, I'll say I think it's 8 cameras that are in the stadium, installed in each stadium. Like I said, we got ours installed a couple years ago because we were kind of their guinea pigs in trying to get things set up for soccer. Second Spectrum works with the NBA and is now in all the NBA stadiums. They've been a big leader in the tracking data for that league. And I don't know if any of you follow the NBA, but my goodness, they do some awesome stuff. A lot of the cool visualizations ESPN's doing are with Second Spectrum involved. They mentioned all these cool advanced stats. The NBA website has gotten all these advanced stats. They're all from Second Spectrum. So they're doing some really cool stuff. But so in order for them to get into soccer, they started playing around in our stadium. And I think us and San Jose were the two big ones because they're out in Silicon Valley anyway. So, but yeah, so we've had those cameras installed for a little while. And I think there's 8. I'm pretty sure I want to say it's 3 on each side and 1 on each end, but I'm not 100% sure. And then what was the last? Oh, how the data gets handled. They basically have a central spot that we can go download all the games from. But what is cool is since it's a league-wide deal, we can get access to any game we want from within the league. It's not just our games anymore. Whereas in the past, for those 2 years, it was only in our stadium in San Jose, and we agreed to share, but that's a really small sample of games, so we couldn't really use it to scout any opponents. We could really just use it for our own home games, seeing how we've done in those. But yeah, so there's like a central location we can go download all the matches for.
Fantastic. So you gave some real great insight, which covered some of the questions from the pre-registration form. So I'm going to try and handpick some of the ones that didn't really get touched upon. So we'll start with Bill Rowe, who's from Burlington Youth Soccer's question. Is that, do you have key statistics that are position specific? And if so, what are they?
Yeah, I think this is a big thing for me yes, very much so, yes. And we're still figuring those out. Some positions are a lot easier than others. Forwards, for me, it's expected goals. And whether or not a coach agrees with that is up to them. But I think I've started to push for that a lot, and at least gives a different frame for understanding how that forward plays. And I can show them too that expected goals is generally consistent from year to year. How much a guy's getting per game, whereas goal scoring might be a bit more all over the place. And so that's a big one for me, but I think that's like the most obvious one, and we can apply that to a lot of positions, wingers, attacking midfielders. We can talk about their expected assists, whatever. But the other positions are a bit harder. With center midfielders, I love looking at recoveries, how often they're picking up the ball. When they pick up those loose balls, are they keeping it? And then when they keep it, are they sparking attacks with it? It's like a threefold thing for me, and I love that stuff. So that's like my favorite position to try and break down is who's standing out in these 3 areas. A lot of times there's trade-off, right? If a guy's keeping the ball a lot, probably not starting many attacks. He's probably playing really safe. But those guys who are the like golden goose, they're the ones that are doing all 3 of those things, tons of recoveries, keeping them, and sparking attacks. If you can find that guy, that's a big deal. And then something like center backs is a big question right now, trying to figure out how we can do that, because as I said, we don't get to see the things they do without the ball. And so we're trying to figure out the best ways to analyze that. But now at Second Spectrum, we can hopefully get a bit more of a handle on how they're positioning themselves and playing disruptors. I think to this point, a big thing we can check is their aerial ability, and how often they win those aerial duels. Who they're winning the aerial duels against is a big part of it too. But yeah, position specific, absolutely.
And you mentioned there, looking at previous years' data to see the trends. Lots has asked if the change in the data source has impacted your ability to see those trends or analyze them.
Yeah, it's definitely something I fear. If luckily we've gone with Opta for the whole time and they're still here, so I can keep doing those same things, and I don't think that's going to go away. I think the Second Spectrum stuff's just going to add another layer. But definitely we don't know how long Second Spectrum will be the tracking provider, and things can change everything. So yeah, it's not an ideal situation if the data company changes. There was some talk a couple years ago about them moving on from Opta, and I was very worried about that because I have to rewrite all my code. But I don't think I was necessarily too worried about a ton of the metrics changing. One of the things that is interesting is Opta has a qualifier called a big chance. It's just a somewhat subjective thing they put on a goal scoring opportunity, that if they think it was a big chance, there's certain criteria they've labeled that it meets, then they put that on there. And obviously that's a big boost to the expected goals for that. But what was funny is I want to say it was like 2016 to 2017, suddenly the percentage of big chances that were being scored drastically changed, which wasn't like all of a sudden our guys started scoring a lot better. It was more that they started their labeling of big chances changed, that their criteria changed, and all of a sudden that would throw off my model. And so I had to throw that out for a little bit, and restart how I use big chances in my model. So that kind of thing can absolutely be frustrating. If it's something more judgmental as to how they're labeling it, yeah, that can be pretty disruptive and frustrating.
Cool. Question from Emanu. Is it possible to quantify a player's ability to learn and keep composure after making mistakes?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And I know people always want to talk about stats can evaluate heart and things like that too, which I think it's something that I can't necessarily show how well you learn. I can show the results of your learning maybe, right? Like we can come up with different ways to see, are these things progressing? And a player that comes to mind is Brandon Bai, who he's a winger in college, but this is like his third year, I think now, of starting it right back for us. That first year is kind of maybe 50-50, but the development he's shown throughout this time, I think what we're already seeing, and we've talked about a lot in the preseason even, was how many more key passes he's getting from that right back spot, how good his crosses have become all of a sudden. Like last year, this was a struggle for him, and we knew it. And you could look at the number of times he tried to pass the ball into the box and how the percent of the time it linked up with players. And now we can start seeing how that number can grow over time, the danger it's leading to. We can look at his take-ons, right, and see how effective those are year over year, and hopefully his tackling and things like that. So I think that's the main thing, is just looking at these stats that we deem valuable and seeing how they rise year over year, because I can say that if we see someone's lacking in something, we're going to try and emphasize that for them and try and push them up in those numbers and see if it's effective. So I think that's the best thing you can do. I don't know that you can look at it on a game-by-game basis. It might take a year to see how that impact is growing, but I do think there's some of that. I think recovering from mistakes is tricky. And yeah, it could be something where if you identify those moments and you keep track of when you think he's made a mistake, we can start looking at stats pre-mistakes versus post-mistakes and try to see how those divide up, if they get down on themselves and things like that. So it would take that instance of you labeling, oh, this was a mistake at this time. Okay, and then we can have that as cutoff points. So I think it's possible. It's not necessarily something I've been doing. So yeah.
Very cool. So a couple of linked questions here. What trends in regards to styles of play and set piece design are you starting to see in the MLS that weren't necessarily there a few years ago? I know you mentioned that the reward for high pressing has diminished somewhat in the past few years.
Yeah, I was going to say like something like 4 or 5 years ago, it was, I think we definitely wanted to be Kansas City. I think a lot of teams were trying to see what the heck they were doing. It was so different. A lot of high press, a lot of shots, all that craziness. And they were really good. They won the league. I don't know if that was 14 or 13, I think. Yeah, it was just, that was the goal, is everybody, I think, wanted to be a little bit more high pressing and cause chaos. And MLS has kind of moved into that direction and now is kind of moving their way around it, like trying to come up with new ways. I think what people have done is start to attack quickly. I think the emphasis on possession has dropped a lot. If you're using possession, you're using it in a very specific way. And so I look at someone like Atlanta, and how they possess the ball is very different. They'll keep the ball around the back a lot and then all of a sudden bolt forward. It's not like they're building the ball slowly through the midfield. It's try and hit a killer pass. At least it was before Van Hal came in, or not Van Hal. What the heck's the guy's name? The coach, Frank de Boer. There we go. When Frank came in, he changed things a bit, but under Tata, it was a lot of pass around the back, and then killer pass through the midfield. And that's so different. Like, it looks like possession, but it's a possession that's very specific to suck you out and then kill you, right? Columbus has done that in the past too. Someone like Red Bull is the complete polar opposite, where they don't want the ball. They every time they get the ball, they're trying to go 2 passes and shoot. And so we have a lot of different styles, but I would say in the end, these are all teams trying to attack quickly. No one's trying to methodically get up the field, because the more, I think everyone recognizes, the more time you allow a defense to set up, the less it gives you the chance to score. It's not so much about your brilliance at carving them up. No one is particularly good at carving up a set defense. And so the more we can go quickly, the better chance we have.
And linked to that is what value do you place on heat maps for goal scoring shots and assists? game to game? Are there trends or habits that you can train for, or is it too unique for each opponent?
Yeah. So heat maps of goals. So like I showed you guys the map of the chances for a game and expected goals and all that. I think that's a really good way of summarizing the game and trying to understand, the chances are almost what it's all about, right? What good chances are we getting? What good chances are we giving up? That's kind of how the game flows. So I think there's a lot of use in that. I think, as I said, we also look at where the key passes came from, where they ended up. And if we saw a pattern there where we saw a bunch come from the same spot, we would definitely look into that. Over the course of a season, I think, yeah, if we start seeing these consistently showing the same thing, again, we'll see a problem there and start to try and figure it out. I think it's very important. I don't think we change our tactics from game to game a bit, but we generally have our own style and our own core values that we're trying to stick to. I think that varies coach by coach, but I think right now we have a pretty stable setup. Our formation wasn't changing a ton last year once we got our rhythm and got our guys in there the way we wanted to. And I think that's pretty consistent. You have little nuances, but for the most part, yeah, you can see your vulnerabilities and see your successes on a pretty consistent basis. So yeah, looking at those kind of things I do think is valuable. And we do a good amount of it. Yeah.
Fantastic. Great follow-up question from Ian McPherson here. How much additional work goes into pre-match prep for an opposition who changed the coach shortly before your game?
It's brutal. Yeah. What that usually would prompt, hopefully it's a few games, because otherwise we're pretty shot. But I think we look at the season-long data and compare it to their last 3 games of data, right, and see what things have changed the most. The tricky part is the coaches are probably going to watch those last 3 games anyway, so they'll also see a lot of it. But I do try to at least highlight these are the areas they're sticking out. And when I look at possession types again, like for me, it's 2 things of both what do they do a lot of, but then what's working for them. If a team is playing maintenance, they're just keeping the ball around the back all the time, great. If it's not leading to anything, then we don't care. So just because a coach might see, oh man, they pass the ball at the back a lot now, that doesn't mean we have to do anything about it, right? And so I try to give that little perspective too of like, just because you see this happening all the time doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad thing. We might want to let them keep doing it. So certain things like that we can help with and see, just because they shifted with what you saw, I might have some more numbers about it's really not that dangerous. We can figure that out. But yeah, we will cut it off at that point, but look at how it contrasts at the beginning, because the players are the same. So we want to see what's shifted in that group.
So moving on to player recruitment.
Yeah.
Kevin Nystrom from Concord Carlisle. Do you use any automated video analytics to scout for players from other leagues?
So I'm not sure exactly what he means by automated, but we first of all, we use a program called YScout. It's an online platform where we can scout players all over the world, watch video of all these players. Pretty much any match anywhere is on there. So that's our main tool for scouting these guys first. We also have some scouts, and our coaches will go watch games as well if they have to. And so, yeah, we do have that video as like a first step for sure. One of the things we're hoping to do as we move forward is when we get data, we can hopefully highlight elements of the video that we want to see. This guy, Devin Pooler, is an analyst in Toronto. He mentioned at Sloan that, data can hopefully highlight what games were a guy's best games, what games were his worst games. And that can be really useful too for video analysis. So they know whether or not they're watching their best or his worst, or they can specifically hunt down his best and his worst and see how those contrasted and are they okay with all that, rather than just seeing his last 3 games, which happen to be the best games. And so you're buying at high value, all that stuff. So yeah, we have some video tools that are really useful for scouting that hopefully we can pair with data really well. So it's not just quickly watching his best moments for 10 minutes. It's trying to get a bigger picture understanding.
And do the Revolution use video or analytics to bring in players for the youth academy or from the draft process?
So I can't speak too much about the academy. I don't know necessarily. I know they use video for their own team, and they're certainly watching those games and they're breaking them down. And we have a contract with, I think it's Huddle, does a lot of the stuff in the league. With the draft, that's a lot of what we can do. I mean, right now the stats that are out there for college kids are minimal. I get I gather up what I can: games, goals, shots, assists, goals against average, things like that. It's tough, but we try to keep track of whatever we can. But mostly it's just getting video. So Instat, we ended up working with this winter just because they have a lot of the college video, and so trying to watch video of all these prospects and see who stands out. Video is pretty much the best we can do. What my stuff will do is highlight a couple guys, and I'll pass it along to guys like Chris Tierney or Remy who are on the scouting side of things, and just see, what do you guys think of these guys? They stood out to me. I might take a look too, so I don't look like an idiot, but he stands out to me data-wise, and I think he looks okay. You guys be the judge. And that's kind of our process for highlighting some of the lesser knowns as they come up. So definitely plays a part in video.
So we're going to go for a couple of personal questions, and then we'll finish up the questions that were given to us in advance in regards to how people can get started, potentially in a career, or what they could do at home to get involved a little bit more in data analytics. Then we'll hit some more questions from the chat box. So first question from Jinha Huang from Bedford Youth Soccer. What is your best memory as a data analyst for the Revs?
Yeah. This story comes up a lot, and so if you've somehow seen or heard things that I've done before, I've mentioned a lot, but there was a specific road game somewhere in like 2014 where we were going to play a team who had, I think, they had just lost the week before for the first time in their stadium. They had never lost at home before that, so they're pretty ominous team to go play on the road against. We had been going in thinking, okay, we'll just try and get out of there with a tie, I think, see if we can hit them on the counter, that kind of a thing, right? And I was working on something looking at how teams perform starting from different spots in the field. So if your possession was starting from your own, from your defensive end, from your midfield, whatever, right? And showing where their strengths and weaknesses were, just kind of working on it with our president. And I decided to look at the team we were going to be playing against just to see how they played out. And ended up bringing it to Brian and talking through it and being like, whoa, this is crazy. This completely goes against what we're going to go do. We need to show this to the coaching staff. What it had said was this team only gets all their chances from when they start in the attacking half. If they start with the ball in the attacking half, that's where they get all their good chances. That's when they get all their goals. And they're nothing when they start in their own half. It also shows that the teams they play against are only any good if they start in the attacking half, not in their own defensive end. If they start in their own defensive end, they're never getting out. And so the idea of bunkering and trying to counter was completely against everything that we were going to be playing. And I know that's what you want to hear. You want to hear that teams go on the road and attack, but sometimes it's best to sit in. Montreal is a team that does that all the time, and they're brutal. And so we said we need to go show the coaches this quickly, and we did. I think it was around Wednesday, like I said, and they completely got the idea. We need to change what we're doing. We need to go press this team like crazy. And so they actually presented it to the players, tried to get the players to come to this conclusion themselves as well based on the numbers. And then just went out and started that game going on the front foot and going after these guys. And we ended up getting a win. Like I said, it was only the second time this team had lost back-to-back weeks, but second time they lost at their home stadium. And I got some emails from our president, from our GM that weekend, just saying that was great. And from then on, that kind of thing got factored in at the beginning of the process. So it's not like I ever know, wow, we completely reversed the way we were going to play this week because of your thing. It just becomes part of the preparation rather than something that might screw with what they're doing. But yeah, that was pretty great to know I directly impacted a result for once.
That's very cool. Somewhat linked to that. So what actions have resulted from your analytics? So I'm going to infer that as, what are you willing to take credit for?
Not much. I think that would be one game. But I think a lot of what I do gets factored in. I think like I said, I impacted that one re-entry draft choice directly. I think I had a hand in one of the guys we signed last year. That I think that was pretty useful. It was just something where our new staff came in and they kept sending me these players. And I kept saying, oh, this guy's all right, but, I think this guy actually looks like he's better. Why aren't you interested in this guy? So we had some back and forth looking at stats, just saying, it's interesting. This is a guy you're bringing up. I think this guy's better. And then eventually they handed me a guy that was like, oh, this guy's definitely a go. I think he looks great. We ended up bringing that data to Bruce and explaining to him what it meant and showing him that not only are our eyes saying this guy's good, but the data's backing it up. And I know that data got mentioned as well when they're talking to the people who actually could pull the trigger on the signing. So that was a big one for me. And I know also I think I impacted a potential trade this offseason to not happening. We'll see if that's good or not when we get a few more games into the year. But it's just nice to know when your voice is being heard a little bit, it's being factored in. I'm not going to be the one making the decisions, but even just getting asked, what do you think about this, lets you know that you're involved and impacted, and that they care to some extent what you're saying. So that's great. And if my data is not there on some of these things, then if I'm not handing it over, they're going to come looking for it. So that's also pretty reassuring.
Great stuff. Good question from Ben Deshane is, it seems like a lot of the work in data analytics, particularly in soccer and the MLS, is proprietary. Do people in the industry share ideas, or a lot of it comes from your own innovation?
Yeah, it depends on I'd say it depends on the guy, and it depends on the team. It's hard to even know which analysts in the league are data analysts. Some of them are listed on their on the staff pages on the club websites. Some of them are not, and even then their titles are very ambiguous. Are they just doing video? Are they just doing data? Are they just on the sports science side of things? So that's hard. I've met a lot of them at this point, though, so I at least know the guy in Toronto, the guy in Seattle are doing some really cool stuff. Devin in Toronto is very upfront about the kinds of things he's looking at. He's presenting a lot at these conferences and stuff, and I'll show you a resource from him too that's pretty useful. And Ravi is always willing to help, the guy from Seattle, always willing to help share some insight he has. He presented a few years ago on a model they had made to help try and prevent injuries, and thought it was fascinating. And everybody wants that. That's the hard thing to achieve. And it's not like it gives you 100% injury-free setup, but it was just something that I was very interested in asking more about, and he's happy to share. So in general, I think we analysts are pretty cool with each other and willing to share some things that we're doing. We're not necessarily going to share the ultimate insight it's giving us, but trying to help each other be better at our jobs is something we seem cool with.
Great stuff. So let's move into the kind of career-focused questions. So how and where would somebody who's looking to get into data analytics start right now?
I'm going to share my screen again quick too, just to show what I have here. Just some quick resources. So I think the biggest thing for trying to do this kind of stuff is you have to have some programming background at this point. You're not going to be able to use a pen and paper to just get after the data, and it's not going to be in Excel all the time. Right now, like the files I'm working with from Second Spectrum, all these JSON files, the Opta files are F24 files, and so trying to work with these files, you need something that can go fast and work in these languages. So the popular ones are knowing either R or Python. And like I said, I'm trying to get my Python going because it's hard to deal with these bigger files in just R, but you can do it. So I'd say, the first thing is try and focus on a language. There's a lot of, I think Code Academy is one of them. There's a lot of places where you can go online and take probably a free course on some of these. Some of them you pay for, a little bit more detailed, to at least get the basics down of these programming languages. And what's cool is with a lot of them, when you have a problem, once you've got the basics down, you Google a problem, everyone else has had that problem, the answer is going to come up, and it's amazing. Like I said, I only had 1/4 of work in R, and from then on, I've just been able to Google my way to success with the rest of it. So it's very much available to get going. So the book for me that got me going was R Cookbook. I still have that at my desk at work. Really simple to understand, I think, and really helpful. Devin on this website he has here it's an analytics handbook. It has a lot of articles to link to. Has some resources for getting started with Python. Has some tips and just general conversation about starting in this area. It's pretty cool. He put it together. I think he put it out like 2 weeks ago, and I just saw it and I was like, oh man, I'm probably gonna go through it too just to see what articles he's referencing. But pretty cool summary there. And then in general, StatsBomb is an awesome website for this stuff. They write a lot of cool articles. Again, one of the places where I might get ideas from. They've also started creating their own data now. It has some things Opta doesn't have. So it has pressure on shots. It has goalkeeper positioning on a lot of these shots. And so they've added some cool things, and they're doing this in leagues all over the world. And they've actually put some data out for free that anyone can access and start playing with. And that's pretty awesome. like you said, a lot of things are proprietary in soccer analytics, and it's been a very frustrating. In baseball, you can always go to the at the box scores whenever you want, start breaking it down. NBA puts a lot of the stuff out now, but in soccer, everything is club bought, and so they're not going to go share that with everybody. It's the money making resource. So, yeah, it's hard to find, but StatsBomb is putting out some of that for free. They have some courses online that you can get started with. Again, those will cost some money, but some cool ways to get started. In American Soccer Analysis, they use the Opta data and come up with some really good ideas. They have a chart of expected goals allowed, or expected goals kind of prevented by goalkeepers, which is a cool way of reversing expected goals and seeing how well a goalkeeper is at actually stopping shots. So Matt Turner, I think, was #1 in the league last year, even though he played something like maybe, I want to say like half the games. He allowed like 9 goals less than he would have expected based on the shots he was facing. It's definitely not a perfect summary of how he performed, but it's a pretty amazing stat to have for someone who only played a limited sample of the game. So it's a cool website as well. But yeah, for me, like, get going on programming, read a lot of articles, and start trying to play around with data. And people have had success either from making really good contacts. Like, there's a big community on Twitter and everything of these guys that you start to find. And the more and more you put your name out there, I think some of those guys start getting jobs because of what they're doing, and they have built up a sort of, a portfolio of their work that is really easy for people to see and helps them get those jobs. And then sometimes teams just post the jobs. Like, I think Cincinnati, before they came into the league, they had a big a job post that was straight up, we're hiring an analyst, and they had a big interview process and found their guy through that. So I think it's on a lot of times on Teamwork where they're posting their jobs, but I try and retweet those when I see them as well. But yeah, so make connections, but also just keep your eye open for when jobs are posted and try to have some of this work done. I know also, sorry, one more thing. When I applied for the job, part of the application process, they gave us a project to do, or it's just tell us anything about the draft. And so we had to use what resources we had and try and come up with something cool to show off to get the job. So being able to roll with projects is definitely helpful.
Great stuff. Quick question from Claudia. Tim, do you play or coach soccer also?
Not professionally. No, I played. I only played until high school, I think. So my body is not athletic. I know what I want to do, and it does not cooperate. I started the process of trying to get some coaching licenses. I might get back into that. Our daughter's 1 year old, so as she gets a little bit older and she starts hopefully playing, it might become something I want to do a bit more of. But it can't hurt to get those licenses probably and start trying to get involved in that kind of thing, especially since all the power I wish I had in my organization I can have on a smaller scale. So yeah, it could be something down the line, but right now I do not. I'll play pickup, but that's about it.
That's cool. Well, we can certainly help you along the coaching journey.
Yeah, right. Thank you.
To go there. So we'll finish with one. We've got lots of Revs fans on the call. Lawrence has asked, what changes did you see after Bruce came in?
Yeah, I think that last 15-minute thing is a crazy summary of what things change, right? It's something that people will say you can't really quantify by stats, but we can at least quantify the effects of we didn't break. I don't know, somehow we had this tendency to break in those last 15 minutes, and looking into whether it's our stamina, whether it's or it's just mental. I think now we'd be better set up to actually see how those physical numbers change. But one thing's for sure, the goals we started giving up in those last 15 minutes totally went down. We started actually holding on to leads and being a tough team to break down. And I think for some reason we were struggling a lot with that beforehand. And I do think confidence played a role. I think just hitting a reset button was enough for this team to get a boost. There are a lot of studies going around in analytics on a new coach bump. And it happens when you change coaches. Generally, your team gets better. It may not last as long as ours did. It usually doesn't. But it's happened in the past. But yeah, so it was definitely somehow we started not giving up goals at the end. I would say, as I mentioned, also Matt Turner was out of this world. Whether or not he can keep that going is a big question, because goalkeeper shot stopping can sometimes vary a lot. That's not anything to say about Matt. It's just that from year to year, a goalkeeper shot stopping against expected goals varies a lot. A lot of times you want to evaluate a goalkeeper more on their their ability to claim crosses, their ability to distribute, things like that, because the shot stopping part's hard to get a read on. But he was amazing at the end of last year, and so he prevented a lot of goals from going in that probably should have. So I think those were the biggest changes. And things started flowing once you get a couple results under your belt.
For sure. Well, Tim, thank you very much for your time. It's been really, really insightful. You've been very gracious. So I'm going to take everyone off of mute just so they can say their thanks. But for me, as a bit of a stats geek, this has been a really good way to spend an hour. So thank you very much to you and the reps.
If you have anything else, questions that come up or anything, feel free to email me, timothyc@revolutionsoccer.net. So I'm okay with that. It's not like I have a ton to do. I'm at home right now, so yeah. But thanks, guys.
Thank you very much. Excellent.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Tim. Have a good night.
Have a good night, boys. Thank you, Tim.
Thanks, Tim and Ian.
Be safe, guys.
Sorry, what was the